Yo there, my Space Cat chummonlies. I recently had a question about dialogue for picture books, so this week we're delving in. It's me, Jules, with a publishing video this week. If you've seen any of my other videos, you know that I love picture books. Whether that's helping folks like you to write one, or whether it's drawing for a new one. If you listen to the end of this video, then you'll find out the definition for the two different types of speech. Considering the dialogue for a picture book is a really interesting subject, and I've got 8 tips for you. Here's number 1. Firstly, listen to what other people say, and when I say people, I mean children. Listen to how they speak and what it is they're actually saying. Remember that your audience are 3 to 6 years old. I mean, you might be writing for slightly older, maybe the 5 to 7s, but the advice is pretty similar. Imagine you're watching 2 adults meet. One might say to the other, "Hi Joe, how are you doing?" But if you see 2 children meeting in a playground, they might say, "Joe, look at this," and then hold up a new toy or a conker or a big bogey they've just found. Sorry if you're having your dinner. Kids speak in really different ways to adults. They're much more immediate and relevant to their moment in time. They haven't yet conformed to those social niceties that we adults do. Even if you're reporting dialogue that an adult is saying, you need to make sure it's accessible to your child listener. Eavesdropping is definitely allowed if you're an author. Before you start writing your dialogue, make sure you read lots of dialogue, and that can be in children's fiction or in adult fiction or in magazines, newspapers, wherever you can find dialogue. It just helps cement in your head the different types and what you're going to be using for your picture book. Oh, and also another really good tip is to read lots of picture books and see how other people, other authors use dialogue in their books for the same age group that you're going to be writing for. Your characters should have their own unique personalities. They might have a way of saying certain things or making certain sounds, or they might have an accent. You should be able to tell who your protagonist is automatically without having to read the words "said Alice" afterwards. For example, you might have written a story about a duck who can't quack properly. Perhaps she only ever says moo. "Quack, quack, quack," said the ducks. "Moo," said Daisy. "Can't you quack?" said Mummy Duck. "Moo," said Daisy. Once you've written your first draft of your story and dialogue, get your metaphorical snippers out and snip away anything that you don't need. A picture book ought to be 1,000 words or less for the age group of 3 to 6 years old. Any longer and a child just won't retain their interests and might just kind of wander off before the end of the book. This means that every word counts. Have in your book every word that needs to be there, and no more. Each word needs to bring value to your story. Here's an example. Little Red Riding Hood knocked on Grandma's door. It was made of oak and had a big brass fox knocker. But no one answered, so Little Red went in. "Hello, Grandma, it's me. I've come with a warm apple pie that Mother made. It's got cinnamon and cloves in it. She said it's really good for your cough." Grandma answered in a funny, gravelly voice. "I'm in here, dear. Come in." Way too much text for a picture book, especially if you can imagine the rest of the story unravelling in such an amount of detail. Of course, if you're writing for older children, then more descriptive writing is absolutely fine. For a picture book, that section of writing could be knocked back to this. Little Red knocked on the door and went in. "Come into the bedroom, dear," said Grandma in a funny voice. Make sure that you get your punctuation correct for publishing in the English language. 2 speech marks end and begin the speech, with other punctuation marks like commas, exclamation marks or question marks inside the last speech mark. Unless you have a full stop, you can still report who said the words without using a capital letter. For example, "Hello Jane," said Tim. Or like this one from my book, Vincent and the Vampires, "Anyone home?" he called in a little voice. And that brings me on to point 6. Keep your punctuation and sentence construction simple. Short sentences with as few exclamation marks as possible. Many people put too many exclamation marks in. So once you've finished your first draft, go back and see if you've got a real big smattering of exclamation marks. Take lots of them out. It's a bit like swearing. If you use exclamation marks all the time, it just becomes a bit ineffectual, whereas maybe the odd swear word can be quite powerful. So use your exclamation marks sparingly. Dress up your dialogue with some simple action. That way you are showing and not telling the story. For example, "You're not my grandma," shouted Little Red as she yanked back the bed covers. Using action helps to place the speaker and unravel a bit more of the narrative all in one. In this speech, we know that Little Red is shouting, so she must be alarmed or defiant. And the action is that she is pulling back the bedclothes with some energy, thus backing up the defiance and the strength in our little heroine. If, on the other hand, she was terrified, it might read like this. Little Red peeped under the covers. "You're not my grandma," she whispered. Now that you have a good draft or 2, read it aloud. If that means you need to go and lock yourself in the bathroom so no one else is around, then do that. Reading it aloud means that you can find out any places where you might stumble over words or the dialogue just doesn't really gel. Like this. When she reaches the wall... When she reaches the wall... Oh, this is going to be good for bloopers. No, I'll just drop it. I'll just edit it in. I'll stop laughing. The villagers line the street and wave as she rides past. When she reaches the wall... What's going to happen? You might also eke out any odd sounding words or sentences that don't seem to flow properly. Go back to tip number 1 and try and think about how a child might speak or understand adult speech. And then once you've gathered up all your courage and you've put your big boys or girls pants on, go and read to some children. See what they say. Read their energy. You know, if they get up and wander off halfway through, then you'll know that something's not quite right and you need to go back to the drawing board. But if they're engaged and they're goggle-eyed at you throughout the story, then you know you've done a really good job. And so on to the 2 different types of speech that I talked about, and that is direct speech and reported speech. With direct speech, then you use quotation marks or speech marks, and you'd write a sentence like this. "I'm hungry," said Sam. However, if you're reporting the same thing, you might say this. Sam said she was hungry. You can use either for fiction. Just remember that dialogue needs to be fairly simple for picture book readers. The most important thing that you need to remember is that these people are 3 to 6 years old, generally speaking. Well, there you go, my roundup of dialogue for picture books. If this has been helpful for you and given you a few pointers, then you might feel like you really need to give me a thumbs up and share the video with other people. And let me tell you, that's okay with me. Next week, I am looking at how to draw hair. I'm off to carve a pumpkin in the image of Boris Johnson. I will see you next time. Nanu nanu.